Hi there, welcome along to a capability demo for Nintex document generation for Nintex workflow. We're going to go through a use case and then I'll do a deeper dive into what the action actually gives you itself. In this instance, we'll show employee onboarding as an example. It's probably one of the most requested demo scenarios, use cases that we're seeing in the market at the moment, which is that ability to collate quite specific documentation based on particular user inputs, but of a very unique output sent to customer, client, external resource, or internal as well. So let's just kick off. As a prerequisite, we've got our information architecture in there. So we've got things that we need to capture for a new user. Important information like their name, email address, job title, department, salary, and so on. So let's just, we'll initiate this from a new form on SharePoint. Obviously, the document generation action lives in SharePoint on-prem 2013-2016, SharePoint Online for Office 365, and also the Nintex Workflow Cloud version, which is more agnostic. So let's complete my form. We'll just onboard a user. Let's go with Mr. Bill Gates, and he is. We'll make up a little address here. I'll just put in my personal email address because not only the contract but also the content will go to Bill as well. Job title, well, we'll bring him in as our CEO, and let's have a start date somewhere in the future just to give our HR team a bit of a time. Now we could obviously have validation in there. Let's select my employment. Now all these choices that I'm putting in here are going to become a bit more relevant as we go into the document generation action slightly further down the track. But essentially what they're giving the workflow in the back end are specific choices and conditions with which to build that very dynamic document as well. So let's just save this, and that's going to initiate a workflow in the back end. And while that workflow kicks off, I'll open up the workflow panel. This is Office 365, but the document generation action is the same configuration across all SharePoint editions. It actually was born in the cloud, so it was available for Office 365 first and foremost. We then released a V2 which had more configuration options first on-prem, and then we sort of circled back and updated the Office 365 version. One of the main reasons for the content automation space, and I guess the release of document generation was due to the deprecation of Word automation services when Microsoft moved to Office 365. Moving this functionality into SharePoint Online certainly filled that gap for us. It's a native drag drop action in workflow. It's a native part of the tool set, and as far as I know, we're the only workflow company that has that functionality as part of the core offering. We're not calling another application to do this, another document generation app. It's built in. It's part of the licensing scheme. It's part of the infrastructure and so on. Okay, so as I said, drag drop action, document generation. Let's look at it in this instance where we're actually building our collateral here. So we're actually building based on either item properties, document variables, and so on. We're building our document for output. Now I'll just do a little walkthrough here. Obviously the configuration options are available through the help file as well, so they'll break them down even more. You can jump on help.nintex.com and those actions are set out. So we need to first select a generation type. Let's take a look at them. So we've got either a single PDF, so we can include up to 20 document templates, which could have multiple pages, and they can be from different sources as well, so Word, PowerPoint, Excel, into a single combined PDF output, and that lets us include up to 20 of these in there. We have a separate PDF file output, so 5 documents in, 5 PDFs out. And also we could keep the original file type. So if the document generation component is happening early in the piece and the document does need to be manipulated and updated later on, we'd keep that original file type to allow for that editing. Then we add our document template. So we're on the third one here. We've already got 2 in there. Select the order that that document is going to appear in its collated output, and then select my template document library. So let's just select my doc templates library here. Take a look at the templates that are on offer. Obviously, these have all been uploaded to SharePoint, so they've got that version control, they've got permission structure and so on in place. So the idea being is that sort of set once, multiple use option. Let's select something here like Melbourne detail, for instance. We can create a new template on the fly. If it's not something that's in there, we don't want you actually having to jump into the client to then build, to then drag drop in. We'll let you do this from the actual action itself. And then you can decide whether that template, and this, if we think back to that initial form, all those conditions around type of employment, the department, the job role, and so on, this is going to dictate whether that template is included in the output or not. So if we set always, it's always going to merge that in there. Otherwise, we could say, well, we only want this to appear if my department is equal to sales, which means that this is a sales specific template that's only going to be collated when it's a sales specific workflow that's being run. So when sales has been selected on the drop down in the form, then that means that that's only going to apply. Next stage is we want to start tagging up this document. So let's open the tag document. And let's just open up Word. Now, what document generation, aside from a new drag drop action, what it's also giving you is a little sidebar as an OWA app called the Nintex document tagger. So when PowerPoint, Word, Excel opens up, you'll see a new sidebar in there when you're opening it up through that tag document button. And what you can do is you can begin to pull in any workflow references in and around the layout that you already have there. So we give you access to all those workflow variables. Anything declared as a workflow variable in and around that workflow will be accessible to the actual template to include. Any imagery as well. So if I just jump back to the action, got a little images tab here as well. So we can select that image name and we can actually add that. So that can be an image that's come from the web. So it can be a public image, or it can be a SharePoint hosted image as well. And those images can be made up through things like query strings within workflow so that they pertain to the actual workflow in flight. So that could be an image that has been captured and uploaded as part of that build, and so as part of that workflow that's in initiation. So it could be a driving license that we've captured for this employee onboarding example. It could be inspection imagery if it's part of a safety certificate that's being generated, and so on. We also give you access to table data as well. Those tables can come from SharePoint lists, for instance. So we could actually build a table of SharePoint list data, but still have the look and feel that's been set from workflow. So these are our options. So then we've also got our workflow context, so standard things happening in workflow. If you want to capture things like the initiator name, for instance, as part of that friendly build, you can also do that as well. And finally, item properties. So that's back to that form, that initiation form. So you can actually have, build the unique dynamic data in and around these specific functions. And if you see here, we've got that item property manager. That came from that initiation form right at the start, where we selected the manager from a people picker lookup, for instance. And it's as easy as just finding where you want that value to go. So we might put in first name in here. So congratulations. Select the tab. That tab goes in. You can then apply formatting to the reference that's gone in. So if I want this to be highlighted for whatever reason, bold, italic, underlined, so on and so forth, when the workflow action runs, it is actually going to add that formatting into the tag. So when it next runs, we're going to see all that red, bold, italic, underlined, so on. Save that. That'll save that back as the template, and that's going to have those tags in there. Then we set our output file name. So what we're doing in this workflow example is we're actually building a file name as a variable. It's a smart file name. It's going to have the employee detail, the employee name in and around just some static text there. But obviously we give you again the Nintex reference insertion, and you can make up a very unique file name. Now you don't need the file extension for this. That file extension is going to be automatically populated depending on what the generation type is. Set the output location. So is it going to a specific document library? If it is going to a specific document library, where's the folder? And we can also set those folders by reference as well. So we could have a document library with a set number of department folders in there. We maybe just say it's going to go into that specific department that's been identified again from the form. You can store that output file URL. So if you are actually then building this collateral but then sending it somewhere else, you'd want to have that file URL as a variable. And also we give you some values to overwrite. So if you are using the versioning within lists and within libraries, you can obviously set that on there. If you want, you can attach this back as the current item. It's going to get rid of that smart selection of output location. It's just going to put that in as a document attachment, for instance. So that's the document generation action. Now that my workflow has actually kicked off, we'll take a look at what it we'll essentially close this out. So let's just jump back to the list. We should have my my new user Bill Gates in my list, my employee onboarding list here. And let's just open up. First things first, we should have a task. So let's just refresh my Outlook web app. And this task, as an example, is just to approve the role and the salary. Now what we're going to do with this one is we're just going to apply some lazy approval here, and we're going to move this task on to the next stage. Now this is the manager that was selected in the form. What we've got in the description is sort of all the smart. So we're building this as a notification variable. So Bill Gates, salary wise, start date that we selected, the manager that we selected, and so on. So let's just reply using lazy approval. I've got all the information there. So let's just send that one through. That's going to move that workflow to the next stage. That was the stage that we just saw. We just highlighted specifically the document generation stage. It's going to build that documentation. It's going to build that contract URL and so on. And then in a number of minutes, we should see that document hit the Gmail account that we actually selected when we created that user account. Obviously, within workflow, we're setting things like workflow status to make that sort of that reporting stage a lot easier as well. So we can sort of scroll along and make sure that that has been updated. So Bill is that bottom line. We've got all that information in there. So we're actually moving this through correctly. And what we'll be doing is we'll be generating a unique document pack for Bill's contract. So that contract of employment, if you noticed on the document generation action, one of the things we were doing, we had two distinct templates for employment. We had a full-time and a part-time. Now because this is a full-time role that has been kicked off, essentially it's going to only include that full-time template in there. So if we take a look at the documents folder, we should have that contract built now. It is quite quick. Let's just check. I've got all my other demo examples in there. Now obviously in the new user onboarding example, this one can go sort of as far as you really want it to. This one could go all the way to building user accounts using the Active Directory actions, assigning to Active Directory groups, setting exchange values, so on and so forth. Really quite an end-to-end onboarding example that we could have. So we've got Bill's employee agreement here. That's been generated by the document generation action, and it's been sent to the documents folder before it then goes out to Bill to actually electronically sign using one of those e-signature providers. So let's just open up the output, that PDF, that converted PDF, and then we'll go through the electronic signature component as well. So if you look at the document that's actually now been generated, it's got a number of core, I guess that 90% of static data, the layout, the look and feel, the imagery, the instructions, so on and so forth. But what we've actually got is the dynamic data, the things that are really unique to that individual line item and workflow in flight that have been pulled in. So we've got the username, the address that we set. We've kept the employer as static, position, reporting to the manager that we selected in the department, where that is located. And obviously, there are values that we could then do sort of lookups in. So if we wanted to say, what are the manager's details based on the department selected, we didn't have to do that as a lookup. We could have just selected the department that Bill's joining and found that manager within Active Directory or within some sort of list-based metric. So if we scroll down, a lot of this is just terms and conditions and so on, but on my last page, I will have a signature panel as well. So we've got our signing provision, and we've got a little Adobe Sign Smart tag in there as well. So let's now go to the Gmail account that was selected. So this one's come from our demo account here, but obviously with the e-signature partners, you'd be able to tailor this quite specifically. We have tailored that welcome message from the workflow action to the anonymous user. Let's just click on this to sign. Again, we've got that welcome message. You can put instructions in there. Adobe Sign will pick up the little highlighted tag. You, as the end user, you'll be reviewing this for signature. Click here to sign. That's where that tag was in there. I'm just going to type my name in here because I'm on the desktop, but if this was mobile, it'd be a lot easier just to sign the screen and so on. Let's just apply. Click to sign. That's all abiding by those electronic signatory regulatory compliance and so on. It's tracking the MAC address, the location of the device and so on. And now what's happening is Adobe Sign, that e-signature component, is providing an update back to us to say that it has finished with that document, it has been completed, and let's just take a look at the copy that's been sent back by Adobe. So that anonymous user now has a version, an electronic version of their contract, which is signed, it's legally binding, and it's back in SharePoint. So if I now take a look at my signed job offers folder, hopefully that's come back quite quickly. It does tend to be seconds rather than minutes that it comes back in, and we've already got that in there. So a minute ago, once it was signed and returned, it's come back to a library location that within that Adobe Sign action I have told it to. Now what my workflow then now goes and does is it has two branches. So post the acceptance of a signed contract, that new user will need an account created, but it will also need some HR induction specifics done as well. So we'll take a look at that signed contract before it then goes into its next stage, which are specific IT functions and HR functions. So let's just scroll down to the signature page. So that landed almost a minute ago. So it really is that quick. We've got our signed here. We've got our sort of the verification that's provided by Adobe as well, or in DocuSign or other electronic signature partners is the same experience. Let's take a look at the email that came back as part of workflow, just to give that hiring manager the assurance that it has actually been completed. And now if we go back to SharePoint, we've got a new user request list, and we've also got an employee induction request list. Now what happens in these two lists is that, particularly for my IT new user, we're doing a few things in the background, like creating a profile, we're setting a password based on policy, so on and so forth. So this one's already actually completed. It's got my username there for billg@ntxteo2.com. What it will then do is send the email with those details to the manager on start date, because we captured that value right at the very start. It will also create that in this instance in the Office 365 admin panel. In on-prem, we can do that all the way back to Active Directory. Now the next part of document generation happens in my employee induction packs. So this is going to build. This has actually kicked off another workflow. This one being far more conditional. So we'll take a look at that action again, the document generation action. And what this one does, again, it looks all the way back at all of those values that we inputted right at the very start. So things like the department that Bill is joining, and also the city. So whether he was in the Melbourne office or the Seattle office, we're going to have a very unique onboarding material collated and sent out to him. And we'll take a look at how that actually works in workflow. There are a number of variables that are being captured here as well that correspond back to those values. And obviously we can do a number of conditional sort of lookups based on all of that. So provided we have those values in some sort of list, we can always do lookups to say, well, if the department is equal to sales, here is your sales org chart. Let's then put that in using those reference tags. We can even do that with imagery. If you are joining the Melbourne office, here's a map of how to get to that office. And we don't actually have to work that into the template itself. All we need is a reference, which is going to look up one of those workflow variables that has actually been set. Now, as far as best practice goes, that's certainly the way to do that. I then have a lot of sort of different templates for all of these different siloed office locations, departments, so on and so forth. Apologies for the lag. My Office 365 tenant sits in the West Coast US, which doesn't help me from an East Coast Australian point of view. While we wait for that to spin up, I have actually already received my my induction pack for Bill, so that workflow has actually completed. So we can actually see the finished product, and then we'll loop back in and take a look at the action that actually corresponded to this. So again, we're using very much the initial variables. We're just passing them around because we know that they've been set once and they can, they're going to be consistent. I have a funny feeling this might be a Wi-Fi issue, but let's take a look. So we've got our induction material for Bill Gates. Let's open this up. Obviously, this is a send notification action from SharePoint. It's sending that content as an attachment out to an external provider. Now in Office 365, that was functionality that SharePoint Online actually did not have, and we've built that in. So we built in that capability. And on-prem is pretty straightforward. So you'll see, if you remember all those references that we were able to insert, they're just smart pieces of dynamic data. So we've got the username in there, we've got the location that they're joining, we've again got a unique image that's been set as a welcome image as part of workflow. So this is actually just a blank slide that we are setting an image location on. So we're actually saying, if you're in Melbourne, set that as the image location, and then throw that into the actual finalized document. We scroll through, a lot of this is static data, which is unique, and then we've got the unique stuff. So we've actually got Melbourne imagery in a Melbourne-based pack. We've got a map of the Melbourne office. We've got the manager's name that's been added in there. And scroll down through, we've got all the sort of unique Melbourne template appendixes selected. Melbourne-based org chart. So the nice thing about this is we're only really calling this once. So this org chart may well change over time, and all we ever need to do is change it when it changes within SharePoint, and that's going to update the template that it gets inserted into. We've got Melbourne-based forms, so we've got the forms that are only unique to those Australian-based new users, and obviously we could also have something like a checkbox that says, does this person get a credit card, for instance, and we add that credit card application form at the end. So that's the induction pack that's been received. Let's take a quick look at how it was actually set up. We've got a little conditional branch here. That conditional branch is essentially just asking the workflow which location is it in, and then we're setting a workflow variable to say, if it's Melbourne, this is the Melbourne welcome photo. If it's Seattle, that's the Seattle one. Obviously, we could add that as more options. And then we've got our conditions. So we've got a few more templates in this output. and we're essentially just adding them all based on a condition. So the Melbourne detail versus the Seattle detail, obviously the condition being which office are you joining. Again, the org charts are unique, but the org charts only need to change once. And we've got our stack of Melbourne or Seattle forms as well. Then we are essentially just again sending that to an HR inductions output. And then our last course is actually sending that email to that person with the attachments. And essentially that's a sort of crash course in document generation. In the space of 25 minutes, we've initiated a new user, we've approved that salary and role, we've created a contract, had it electronically signed and returned. We've then built a user account in the admin panel for our new user, which let's just take a jump in that. So obviously, if this was on-prem, the application would be adding that to Active Directory and setting those exchange parameters, as well as things like Yammer accounts, CRM accounts, and so on. We can do all that automated through workflow. We do have an example of that as well, if that's of interest. But just to sort of show the final stage here is that it's gone all the way into that admin panel, and we should have a new user created in here under users. Yep. So we've got that. We've actually even assigned an enterprise license to them as part of workflow as well. So we've actually looked at which workflows we have, which licenses we have available, and we've added an E1 license to that new user. That's obviously something that we can do with the workflow actions as well. In on-prem, you can set groups and so on. We've also then packaged in an HR list. We've created a unique induction pack, and we've sent that out to the new user as well. We've done all that from one core form with those key values in there. So that's all there is to show for today. Thanks very much. We'll send on this recording.